So this is going to be just a really quick webinar here, talking about what's indexing, what's an ANI database, and why does it matter. So when we're talking about indexing and ANI databases, of course, we're talking about it in a particular context, and the context is discovery. So discovery here means finding relevant and hopefully helpful information for our research. So we know that researchers are out there writing things. They're doing the research and then they're writing about it in articles or reports, different kinds of research outputs. And we want to find the ones that are going to be helpful for us. And so there are various tools that we use that help us find these things. So there's a whole bunch of different tools. This is a pretty random array on the screen in front of you here. But if we think about them, we can think of them as falling into, broadly speaking, 3 different categories. And I think that if we're thinking about indexing, then it's helpful first to think about the different categories of tools that we use to find research, and then to think about how those tools work and what we actually find with those tools. So if we think about the tools, one kind of tool that we're all familiar with are academic search engines. And then there's also citation databases, sometimes also called citation indexes. So these are things like Scopus or the Web of Science Core Collection, or more recently, Lens, which is a new tool out there. And then there's abstracting and indexing databases. But there's a lot of confusion around this terminology because all sorts of people use different words to talk about the same things. So for instance, really reputable publishers will talk about the abstracting and indexing services that have included them, and they'll keep Google Scholar on the list, even though Google Scholar is not actually an abstracting and indexing database. So they're just sort of using it more generally as a way to discover scholarly information. It's a tool that lots and lots of people use to discover scholarly information. Both citation databases and ANI databases are often called bibliographic databases because sort of the core of those databases are the bibliographic records that lead you to the research. So for our purposes today, I want to define them in these 3 categories, but I just need to acknowledge that there are different ways that people talk about them, and sometimes that really serves to muddy our understanding of how these tools work. So I think thinking about them in this way helps us clarify our understanding of how they work. So when we think about how the tools function, it's really helpful to think about what it is that they're searching. So, and another way to think about this, another way to phrase this is, what is their scope and content? And scope and content has 3 different components. So one component that's quite important is what's the subject definition of what it is that you can expect to find when you use that tool. So if you're using Google Scholar, you can expect to find both, scholarly information having to do with any discipline. And then because a lot of because it's entirely done with robots, then a lot of other things also creep into there. So for instance, lunch menus. So things that nobody thinks is scholarly information, but it just has gotten in there for some arbitrary reason because the robot thought it was scholarly information. And they don't give us a very concrete definition of their scope and content. Another aspect of thinking about scope and content is the date range. So is the material going back to volume 1, issue 1 of a journal? So from the first day that journal was published, or is it starting at the same time that the database started. So even if the journal had already been published earlier, does its inclusion begin with the start date of the creation of a database? We see both kinds of situations. And then the last thing is, what kind of publication do you find in there? So are you only finding academic journal literature? Or are you also finding trade publication articles, theses, patents? And so these three things are defining what it is that we expect to find within a database. So if we think about the citation indexes, the subject definition is really broad. So it covers all sorts of, especially scientific disciplines. And the date range tends to be very broad as well, but the types of publications that are included are more focused around scholarly journal articles, and conference proceedings and sometimes meetings as well, but they tend not to include things like patents or standards or reports. So then finally, it's really helpful to think about how the content is represented. And so by this, I mean, what is it that when you search with the tool, are you actually searching? So what's the record that's representing that research, that journal article? What parts of it are you searching? Are you actually searching the full text of the journal article? Are you searching a record that sums it up? And what, if anything, is actually being done to that representation, to that record, to make it easier for you to discover whether it has to do with what you're looking for or not. So here we have just the bibliographic information. So this is quite standard to have in all kinds of tools that were used for searching. So the title, the authors, where it's been published, the date of publication. So this is the information that actually lets you go and find the full text of the article, because it tells you where it is and when it was published. So it used to be that we had to, go to the journal on the shelves in the library and pull off the right volume. Now it tends to be more likely that we can just find it electronically, but it does the same thing for us. But it's beyond that where it varies more. There are enhancements made to help us discover what we're looking for. And that's when we get to the indexing. So that's where the enhancement comes in. So if we think about academic search engines, there is no indexing. What we're looking at is exactly whatever it is it has to search. Often it's the page on a publisher's site about the journal article. So it has the bibliographic information and the abstract and maybe author supplied keywords, but it also might be the full text of an article or the full text of a report or what have you. So it's a real mix and match. It really varies what you're searching. There's no uniformity there, which is why you tend to get such very long results lists and ones where it's sometimes quite hard to figure out why a certain item showed up on it. Citation databases have the bibliographic information, and then they tend to include the author supplied keywords. So author supplied keywords are words that the author will say sum up the content of this article. So they're supposed to be helpful. They are helpful for finding the article, but they are just coming from the author's head. And so different authors are better at this than others. And there's no particular uniformity to it. And then different citation databases have other ways that they will supply other points for you to find the information. So it might be that you can also search the titles, like included in your searches, the titles of all the references within an article, or it might be publisher supplied keywords as well as the author supplied keywords. So it really varies how the next step goes. But with abstracting and indexing databases, the next step is beyond the bibliographic information, is that if there's not an abstract that's included already with the record, then the abstracting and indexing service will actually write an abstract for it. It used to be that before about 2005, that any abstract could be revised to make it fit the focus of the database more precisely. So in the case of FSTA, to make sure that it drew out any food connections, even if the author in their abstract hadn't really talked about the foods especially. But now it tends to be the author supplied abstract unless there is not one. So for instance, for a trade publication, that's actually written by the database. And then there's the indexing terms. And the indexing terms are pulled from our thesaurus, or for any database that's an abstracting and indexing database, from their thesaurus, and added to the record to give additional points of discovery that are shaped by the subject discipline that the database focuses on for people who are searching to help find the record. So in this case that we're seeing on the screen, these subjects are actually indexing terms, and they have been pulled from the index, which is really, really, really thorough, really focused on food science and nutrition, and has relations between all the terms. So everything's in a hierarchy. So that you can see that antibiotics is tied to drugs, is tied to residues. And then there's also moments where you have use for terms, where there's a term that researchers might use in one part of the world, but it's pulled under the umbrella of another term, so that regardless of which version people use, they'll get all of the records, regardless of which one they use in their search. And so now I want to go really quickly into some actual records so that we can see a little bit more concretely what I'm talking about. First of all, just to demonstrate that Google Scholar does indeed include all sorts of things as so-called scholarly literature. Here's a Montana Barbecue and Bar Allergen and Nutrition Guide. So, and you can find school lunch menus and all sorts of things. But if we go into the Web of Science here, I just want to show you quickly, here is an example actually in the core collection of a really basic search just for foods. And this is how you can gauge what the scope and content of a particular database is that you're in. So when you go to document types, then it will tell you. And if we look at these closely, we can see that there's a really nice breakdown of various components that can be within academic journals. So editorial material, review or article, or a correction or a retraction, etc. And so you can always figure out with a broad search what kind of sense of the scope and content is material-wise. Then you can usually tell by doing some practice searches the subject breadth, if you don't know that already. Instead of being in the core collection, if we go to the FSTA and go to descriptors, which is another name for the index terms or the subjects. So it's confusing because indexing has many, many names that are applied to it. But if we go into there and we do a quick search for vitamin C, and look at the hierarchy for vitamin C deficiency, then we can see how it's falling in the hierarchy. And so each of these are words that could be added to any record. And if I do add one, just vitamin C, and search it, then I know that all of these 5,000 results that I got back are really focused on vitamin C in one way or another. And so we are getting the benefit of the indexing, whether or not we go into the thesaurus to use it explicitly, because if I were just to search vitamin C as a topic search, which searches several fields, then all of those same results would also show up. But you can also get to know the thesaurus in any abstracting and indexing database that you use. And so then you can use it to learn the vocabulary that's being used in searches around your topic to make your searches better. So I'm going to quickly go back to my slideshow. Because I want to make sure that we do have time for questions if there are any. But I want to sum up in my very, very, very whirlwind introduction to indexing, the ways that indexing can help discovery. It does it by cutting down on search noise. A smaller pool of records that are focused on a particular subject, even if it's defined in a very broad way, means that you are already focusing your search. There's just likely to be fewer irrelevant records in an abstracting and indexing database. And you know that you're searching the main content or subject of each research output, by which I mean you're not searching a word that happens to be in the full text of an article, but it's not really what that article is about, because in order to make it into the record, it has to be pretty central to what it is that that article is about. So you'll still get some things that are irrelevant, but you'll get fewer if you use an ANI database most of the time. And it's also really helpful because the indexing helps shape the controlled vocabulary by the discipline. So it really is all shaped by the discipline, the way that you're getting the results and the language that you're using. And it's using the language in the sense that you mean to use the language. It also increases the number of discovery points beyond those that are supplied by the author. So authors can do a varied job in making their work accessible for searchers. That's not their main focus, really. That's not their job. So having somebody else, an indexer, come through and make sure the appropriate indexing terms or discovery points are in the record really helps us with the searching. And finally, because abstracting and indexing databases will write an abstract for publication types that don't have them automatically, then this allows for a broader range of publication types to be discoverable, which, depending on the focus of your research, can be really, really helpful. But within food science, it can be helpful. For instance, if you're doing winemaking, there's a lot of important research that's reported in trade publications that just otherwise would not necessarily be available to researchers. So I'm going to now ask if there are any questions.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for that. We haven't received any questions so far through the chat. If anyone does have any questions that they haven't sent across yet, please do so. Otherwise, if you think of something later, then you can always contact us either using the website or email.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. So then I will just leave it here to say, if you have any questions about FSTA, then you can contact us, or if you have any requests for bespoke training, either about FSTA in particular or about literature search best practice, then please do contact me. So thank you so much for coming, everybody. And like Hannah said, if you do have any follow-up questions, we would be very happy to hear them and respond and help you.